Again. So thank you so much for being with us. Today is the third in our webinar series on mandatory reporting. So my name is Morgan, and I am a community research liaison with the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at the Oregon Health and Science University. The Oregon Health and Science University sits on the occupied land of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Withlala Bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, Wasco, and many indigenous nations of the Willamette Valley and Columbia River Plateau. Before our presenters introduce themselves, let's go over a few details about this webinar. American Sign Language interpretation is available for today's webinar. Thank you, Vanessa and McKay, for being here today. Spanish language interpretation is also available. Thank you, Rosie and Andre, for being here today. If you click the icon that looks like a globe, you can choose to listen to this webinar in Spanish, and I believe Rosie will also drop some information in the chat about how to access that as well. You can also turn on closed captioning by clicking the CC icon. And if you have a question for any of our panelists today, you can type it in the Q&A box and we'll get to it toward the end. All right, and now we'll go over to our presenters. So, Lee, I think you said that you wanted to go first.
Hello, my name is Lee, and I am here presenting as someone who has had experience both being a mandated reporter and working in the same field, not being a mandated reporter. I have worked as a mandated reporter. I'm going to be checking my notes, which is why my eyes kind of drift over here often. But I've been working as a mandated reporter. I was a school counselor for an alternative school through Job Corps, and I was mandated at that job. I was a case manager for the aging and disabilities at Moltco, and I was a mandated reporter then. And I used to, much before that, do in-home care with hospice, and I was mandated at that time also. I've also worked in the field as a non-mandated reporter, as a domestic violence and sexual assault advocate. And in that, I was not mandated when I worked on hotlines, when I did emergency response to go to the hospital or police station. And also for legal meetings like in court or at attorney's office. And I did emergency response where I would go to the hospital or police to meet with someone who had recently been victimized. In none of those situations was I a mandated reporter because the position I was working at did not have that requirement. I also have personal experience as a child having mandated reporter contact CPS about my family. When I was in junior high, I told another student about something that was going on in my family, and a teacher overheard and contacted CPS. At that time, I was interviewed by a police officer, and then I was removed from the home. And I spent about 6 to 8 months, as I remember it, in foster care. And then the only time I ever interacted with the court system directly was the day that I went to court to have the case closed and then be permanently returned to my family's custody. I had been home for about a week when that occurred. So that's pretty much a rundown of the basics of my experience with mandated reporting.
Thank you so much, Lee. Beth, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Beth. I am a person with disabilities, and I'm a parent of a person with disabilities who's an 11-year-old. I became an RN, so I spent 15 years being a mandated reporter. However, a lot of the education on that is more medically centered than any kind of socioeconomic. And I've had personal interactions with CPS and mandated reporting. As a child, CPS calls were made on my behalf. And I also was removed from the home and spent about 9 to 10 months in foster care, and went back to my family's home. And now as an adult, I've also had a report made on myself as a parent due to poverty circumstances. So that rounds out my experience with mandated reporting.
Thank you, Beth. And Desiree, would you like to introduce yourself? I don't know, Desiree, if you're speaking, we're not able to hear you. Think you're not, think you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry. My name is Desiree. I began this field in working in a suicide hotline in a 13-bed crisis facility. I then moved to Oregon and worked in group homes where we were mandatory reporters. And then I became the director at Oregon Industries for the Blind, where I taught mandatory reporting. And now I am a client in services. So I've been on all three ends of it, receiving it, giving it, teaching it. And because of the lack of knowledge with the reporting, I had to leave Oregon because of domestic violence, and I am now living in Texas. I've been here about a month, and I just found an apartment 2 weeks ago and moved into an apartment.
Glad to hear that's working out for you, Desiree. Thank you for being
Thank
here with
you.
us. Yeah. All right. So I'm next going to start asking some of the questions that we came up with earlier when we were meeting together. And again, Desiree, I know that you have your camera off, so if you can just use like there's a little Zoom function that says like raise hand if you just want to let me know, or you can just jump in and answer.
Where do
Whatever.
I turn my camera on at?
There should be a little icon that says video.
It was on until let's see.
But oh, there you are. Great. So all right.
Okay.
So first we're going to talk about the process of reporting, since I think when we were meeting together earlier, a lot of you were identifying that this was the process of reporting was one that really needed more attention given to it. So what things should a mandatory reporter be aware of when thinking about making a report?
Repercussions.
Yeah,
So
I think I think that that's an important thing to think about in a couple of different ways. So to think about the situation at hand and to be alert about who you're calling about and whether or not you may or may not have some personal safety concerns, and if so, prepare for that. But then I also think it's important when we're thinking about personal safety to be aware of our own emotional safety around around doing this reporting, because there are consequences to making these calls and people have to weigh these decisions very carefully. And once they've made the decision, it can feel like a lot, especially if you're at all uncomfortable with moving forward or you feel that you are anxious about it, then making sure that you have a plan for yourself, for your emotional safety, to unwind or to speak to people in your community that are your support, or to look out for the fact that it could cause stress for you.
It causes a lot of stress, and preparing for it is a huge issue.
Mhm.
you and Beth, I saw that you had your hand up earlier. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I also believe that you should be aware of the whole process, what it entails, how long it takes, the effects it will have on the person that you're calling on behalf of and their family and anyone around them, as well as like what Lee was saying. the effects on how long it will affect yourself concerning if you have to be in the situation with the people you're calling on for any extended amount of time. Say it takes, 5 or 6 months, then you have to be in a small space with those high energy emotions.
Thank you, everyone. All right. What are some of the personal and external barriers to making a report that a mandatory reporter will need to overcome?
The fear of what's going to happen to you or to that individual, the fear of retaliation. Yeah, it's hard. I had to leave 2,300 miles away. I have to leave my whole family.
Yeah, that's really rough. I'm so sorry, Desiree.
Beth, you wanna?
Yes, barriers like that I've thought of include things like personal biases based off of culture, religion, different ways of life, and also poverty, because a lot of times it's not about not caring, it's about not having, and a lot of times the reports for neglect are due to poverty sources.
So I
Yeah.
think personal barriers might be like we've been talking about, anxiety about what would be the outcome, and anxiety about entering into the process, anxiety about maybe feeling like you're wrong and you initiate a whole bunch of people and then nothing comes of it. And those kinds of anxieties should not operate as barriers, because mandated reporting is there for a reason. It is there to make sure that people who may not otherwise have an opportunity to seek safety are provided with somebody who can see this and act on their behalf. So we do need to be alert that it is part of our responsibility as mandated reporters to think about potential barriers that we would experience and to recognize that we need to be prepared to overcome them if something happens that falls within our arena of required reporting or that is a concern for us, because it is necessary to take those steps for people's safety when it is triggered.
Thank you. So on that topic, what are some of the considerations for your own personal safety when making a report, as well as the safety of the person who you are making the report on the behalf of? And I see Beth, you have your hand up. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, you always kind of have to worry about is there going to be retaliation at home because the secret got out? Is there going to be retaliation to the person who called because when someone is abusive or neglectful, there's often problems with emotional control. So to me, those are the two biggest ones.
Thank you, Beth.
I want to second that, but I also think that recognizing that there could be emotional barriers, like you said, just anxiety around it or concern around it, feeling unsure of yourself about making this call. And so that is all kinds of stuff that I recommend that you think about while you're doing this training, and then also think about when it comes up. But as it is a part of your position that you probably don't think about a lot when you're doing your job, to be alerted to that possibility just in your daily, not thinking about it every day, but being aware of what kinds of things you're noticing for yourself that create barriers, or what kinds of concerns you might otherwise have, and how to be prepared to either overcome or set those aside when it's important for you to step up and make that call.
Yeah, you definitely need to be prepared. I had staff that turned in things and they ended up having to go to court, and that wasn't where they wanted to be, and they were scared after they had to go to court and they have to go again. And so they need to be prepared for things like that because it can and will come up.
Thank you.
So I did have an experience with a coworker making a call because a student had shared with them that something was going on in their home with a sibling. And the the coworker that I worked with was very nervous about making the call and really wasn't sure if they wanted to be involved in the process or if they wanted to have more information or really wanted to think hard about making that call. And when a few of us discussed what she'd been exposed to and what the rules were, it was sort of decided that she would need to go ahead. And unfortunately, CPS got involved right away and questioned the family and did nothing. So it was sort of what people can think of as worst case scenario for that, where you out that a child in their home is talking about something that the family may not want being spoken about outside of the home. And then any kind of protections you would expect may not be forthcoming. And it was a concern for my coworker, and we were concerned about the situation. It ended up being a non-volatile situation in that nobody was harmed or injured, but it was an emotionally difficult situation for both my coworker and for the student. And my coworker experienced a lot of disappointment around their experience with trying to contact CPS and trying to get help, and when they had been really pushed to think that this was a bad situation that they needed to act on, and the people who were meant to act on it didn't follow through or didn't have what was required to follow through. And she and I ended up having a lot of conversation about whether she did the right thing or the wrong thing. And I was of the conclusion, and I believe that she spent most of her time under the conclusion that she did do the right thing for a collection of reasons. One is which that if something else comes up in the future, there will be this case outstanding that can help bolster anything that might come up in the future. The other is that it was her responsibility, and she really didn't have the choice to skirt that responsibility. It was a part of her role and it was a part of her position, and so she needed to make that call. But once she made the call and did her part, how it's handled past that is not her responsibility. So the fact that the state did not move forward is not about what she did or what she should have done. It was about what the state did and what the state potentially should have done. But she performed her role properly. And that is really what was required of her, and potentially could have made a big benefit at the time and potentially could make future benefits for that student.
In response to what you've said, Lee, the system doesn't work if people don't call and report on suspicion. So it's all about being a cog in the wheel to change it. But yeah, you have to report no matter how it does turn out.
Thank you, everyone. It's a really great conversation. How do reports remain confidential and not have consequences for the person being harmed?
Sorry, could you say
Say that
that again?
How do reports remain confidential and not have consequences for the person being harmed?
I I don't know a direct answer to that because once you make the call, how CPS moves forward is up to them and their policies. So if you make a call and you say, you know, if you're not going to take the child out of the home, don't do anything or anything like that, that's really, you can't set that rule in advance. CPS is going to follow their policies. So it is possible that when you make the call, there will be no more privacy after CPS involvement, as I understand it. But I'm definitely open to hearing that people have had different experiences.
Adult Protective Services keeps it pretty private, but once the police get involved, they don't, it's not private.
Yeah.
Great. Any other thoughts on that? We can move on. All right, so the last question for this section is, reporting can have an impact on you. Be prepared for self-care. What is that? And I think we'd all kind of thought about like, what are some things that you can do to have that support and in place, and what sorts of things you can do to take care of yourself. Any thoughts on that? Beth, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think one of the biggest parts of support would be community. So speak to your peers. Like in Lee's example, talk to them about the story. Let others know that are also mandated reporters what you're going through, how you're feeling about it, and get their take on it. And I think another huge part of self-care is being aware of your surroundings while you're at work, being cautious about, your safety, your personal safety. Those are my big things.
I think that thinking about what works for you as far as the support that you would seek, and to be generous with yourself in that, even if you're thinking, oh, I feel fine, maybe reach out to your community or do whatever feels supportive to you also. But I would like to recommend that people consider having or forming a group of mandated reporters that you work together on to navigate these things, so that other people who are in a similar position or understand what the potential issues or concerns are would be the people that you're relying on to help you feel guided and supported through the process.
Thank you. Any last thoughts on that before we move on? All right. So moving on to the topic of training, are there any particular topic areas where you would like to see more training for mandatory reporters?
I have a lot to say for that. I am involved in a grassroots kind of learning circle, and we're studying about the Upend movement, which is just about how CPS runs, what their policies are, and what the effects of foster care and group homes are. The fact that it's overpopulated and it's very difficult to find placement, and emotional health is often neglected. I think that a lot of training needs to go on in learning about what the process is going to be, what to expect over the next several months, and in the participants of your classroom, or how it will affect them emotionally, because there's going to be some sort of backlash. So I also think some psychology is needed in knowing how it's going to work for the population that you work with.
My hands go to sleep and I drop my phone. I'm sorry. Severe carpal tunnel.
That's understandable.
I think that it's also important for people to have a solid understanding of the community that they're working with or the culture that they're working in. Because what may seem like a concern to me may not seem like a concern to somebody else. And that reason may be cultural, it may be social, it may be environmental or religious. But what I might feel like felt threatening or seemed off may not be the same for another person, and it may not be the same in that community that I'm working in. So I think Beth has brought up that poverty was an issue that came up quite a bit for her. And, you know, if you're working with an impoverished population, you're going to see want. But are you seeing want because the parents are trying and doing what they can, or are you seeing want because the parents are failing to try or not doing what they can, or they not stepping up to their responsibility in a way that they should be and that they have access to. And understanding that difference really informs how you look at a situation that may be concerning to you. The same with any other kind of like social, religious, or cultural setting. What is normalized and acceptable in the community versus what is normal and acceptable for you? And do you need to spend more time having experience with that community to be able to recognize trouble spots in a family versus a family operating different than you're accustomed to? So, yeah, I wish we had more training around that.
Thank you. Any final thoughts on this?
I really wish that there was more training for the whole thing. I think it's a very important burden that we put on people in sort of an unsupported way. And so I do wish that there was more of an understanding around what the experience of contacting CPS or making a mandated report is, and what to expect as a person who's making that call, because you do sort of find out as you go a lot of the time. And that to me does not feel like the most successful process for people being able to make these decisions comfortably and confidently.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to that before we move on to the next question? All right. See what we have next. How should mandatory reporters discuss the process of making the report to the people being reported and the persons at risk?
Sorry, clocks, can you hear them?
I think we can hear something, yes.
Sorry, I'll try to move to another room.
Would you please repeat the question?
Of course. How should mandatory reporters discuss the process of making the report to the people being reported on and the persons at risk?
So I think that they're kind of two different things. I feel like even with a child who can be very young, if you are making a report based on something you've heard from them or something that will impact them, then I think it's proper to have a conversation with them. I think people need to make that decision for themselves, but to discuss with the person who is the subject of the report that you are making the report, so they are not caught off guard by any follow-up actions and they have an understanding of what is potentially to come. I think that the decision to contact the person who is being reported on is a more careful decision to be made, because as we discussed, people can be really upset by this. That your potentially bringing in legal ramifications or other situations into their household that they may not want to experience. And then if their response is to be angry or volatile, then that's something that you need to consider and prepare yourself for. If you're concerned that this is a volatile person and it's not going to be safe for you to inform them, then I would consider not. But if you feel that this is a conversation that you would be comfortable having with the person who's going to be reported on, then I would consider doing that.
I agree. I think you need to prepare that person, not only that you're going to report, but what might happen to them, what the process is. Like, you're going to report to an agency, the agency is going to report to the county's going to call the police. I mean, there is a huge process of what's going to happen, and that individual needs to be prepared for what they're facing, what they're going to face in the future. It is very emotional. It's very draining on the whole entire family, not just that individual, but the whole family. If the family could be educated, this is why I did this, this is what was happening, and this is what I had to do. Because a lot of the times the family doesn't understand. They think you're just trying to get someone in trouble, or you're, well, they got mad at me, so now I'm going to pay them back like this, or the family needs to be educated too, or friends, or whoever.
Thank you all. Any last thoughts on that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I do think that if you make a decision to talk to either the person who's being reported about and or the person that's being reported on, to be clear and direct in what you're saying, to be honest and forthcoming, to explain your role and the limits of your role. And then also, if you do need to be alert for your safety, to in advance make sure that people around you know you're going to do this, so you have to reach out to them. They're prepared to respond. Excuse me. But I also think you want to be really alert about not accidentally initiating any kind of savior language, like I'm going to call and then the police are going to come take you to a safe place and you won't have to deal with this anymore. You cannot guarantee that. So you need to be honest about what steps you are taking and what are the potential things that are coming next, but not to promise that you know any outcomes, because none of us do, and we can't be prepared for that.
Right.
Right, I'll wait just a little bit more in case anyone has any last thoughts here.
I think I just glanced at our notes and I noticed that we had spoken before about being alert to, after a report is being made, to being alert to what to look for if there is retaliation in that family. So if you are, like, say it's a student in your class or somebody that you have ongoing familiarity with, report has been made, whatever the outcomes are, chances are there's going to be some like changes in behavior and some other kinds of things that come up just from having had all of this come up in the family, but also to pay attention to the fact that no matter what CPS decided, you're still a mandated reporter for that person. So keep an eye on whether or not you see things that continue to be disconcerting, or you see things that may be retaliatory.
Thank you so much, Lee. All right. Any last thoughts here? All right, so last question for this section is, why is it important for mandatory reporters to make a report irrelevant of their feelings or being afraid of the outcome?
Because of the person they're working with is being victimized. Once the staff leave, if the staff is seeing something, once they leave, that level goes up immensely. And like just from past experience, little things had been mentioned here and there, which heightened the awareness of the abuser to where they were doing things more after that staff left. Just, I don't know what I'm trying to say without, go ahead and go on to someone else, please. Thank you.
Of course, thank you, Desiree. Beth, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, could you repeat the question?
Of course, let me read it again. Why is it important for mandatory reporters to make a report irrelevant of their feelings or being afraid of the outcome?
For me, so if nothing occurs with a report, at the very least, as Lee had mentioned earlier, at least there is a report made to reference back. So it establishes a pattern, pardon me, a pattern of behavior that could potentially save a life. So even if you don't get the outcomes you desired on that first call or even 10th call, at some point that somebody somewhere continues to intervene, there's a better chance of saving that person from whatever is going on that is dangerous, neglectful, or abusive.
Right.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
I think that I don't know if we mentioned it beforehand, but as a mandated reporter, when I did serve as a mandated reporter, it was very clear with the population that I worked with that that was a part of my role. So they would know in advance if they were talking to me that there was a potential that that I would need to call if it were something, and I would be very clear if you know what kinds of harms that I would be concerned about. So that way, if they're not caught off guard by having this potentially happen, and that can get a little tricky when it can sort of feel like, you know, if you're going to try and talk to me about something careful, I might call the police on your family. You want to be pretty clear and direct about, you know, if you, I understand that you were being harmed in these particular ways, physically, sexually, whatever. Or if I am concerned that you are going to harm somebody. But also to be clear that we can talk about a lot of things and we can have a lot of conversations that don't just result to me hearing something and calling the police. That it is specifically about ongoing harm or that it is specifically about this or that. That way you can still have like clear and open and direct communication with someone who may be thinking about what they want to share with you, but is comfortable that you are a person that they can share with.
Thank you, Lee. We'll wait just a bit more to see if anyone else has any final thoughts. All right. So our next section is about education. So our first question is, why is it important for mandatory reporters to be aware and check their own personal biases before making a report?
I think Lee touched on this earlier with the what may be normal to you in your household may not be normal in another household of another culture, race, religion, etc. And so to normalize the cultural traditions, behaviors, and get a cross reference before you judge.
Thank you, Beth.
And to be aware of the circumstances of the person that you're interacting with. You know, am I seeing harm, a potential harm with this child because right now the family is in disrupt and there's, you know, there's division going on and potentially somebody is moving and there's a lot of chaos. And what does that chaos look like versus what does a normal household look like? But also being aware of are these things being done in a way that is like neglectful or harmful to the child, or is it that things right now are in disrupt because it's a disruptive time in the family and the family is working on leveling those things out? So, you know, potentially you might see that child report that there's a bunch of fighting and anger like during a divorce, but is this something that is volatile and scary? Is it something that's threatening to the child? Or are people fighting over stuff because they're in the middle of a divorce? And what are your feelings of concern? Are you concerned about a household seeming that it's in temporary disarray? Are you concerned about a household seeing that it's in permanent disarray? Or are you concerned about this situation related to separations of incomes, or one person, you know, not having potential income to support the family, and that is something they're seeking to resolve versus, you know, continued and unapproachable deprivation for a child is a very different thing. So are you seeing something that is a one-time situation that is not harmful, although it may sound bad and disruptive? Or are you seeing something that is a person in harm who's also in a disruptive situation, or potentially not in a disruptive situation?
Thank you, Lee. Any other thoughts? I can also read the question again if that's helpful.
So I think we talked a lot before we came to this panel about being aware of our own personal biases, and I think that that's extremely difficult to think about and dissect for ourselves, particularly in these positions. But if you know yourself to have less faith in a certain community for whatever reason, for your own personal reasons, or if you know yourself to carry a bias or an ism, is that what you're seeing in this situation, or are you seeing potential harm? And to really be alert about what was my thinking when I became concerned. Was I concerned about triggering information? Was I concerned about the things that I was hearing? Or was I hearing something and then thinking, well, this family would do that? And thinking about the reality of what you are bringing to the table before you decide that you are seeing harm.
Thank you, Lee. All right. We'll wait just a bit to see if anyone else has anything they want to add to this. All right, I will move on. There's no other thoughts on that topic. So what are some of the barriers to communicating with persons at risk? Thank you.
maybe the person is just wanting to get even and trying to involve that staff member or whatever into a situation that just to get even with someone. I've had that happen to me before. They they were just being vindictive. There wasn't really any abuse going on. So I don't know how, but some kind of way to investigate on your own to make sure that there is really something happening before you get involved.
What sort of
I think-
advice would you? Oh, sorry.
No, please you.
I was just wondering, Desiree, if you're comfortable like thinking about situations like that, like do you have any advice for like how you might speak to the person who's making the report or who's claiming that they're potentially being harmed if you're suspecting that there might be something going on?
Yeah, I think just questioning them, excuse me, more in depth. Um, and just seeing if every time they answer you the same or if they bring up, new things or because it caused a lot of problems once before when I reported something that wasn't happening with the mom and her daughter. It created a huge issue, and it was one of my staff, and it was a situation where it was at a vocational site, and it was one of my staff, and another staff didn't like that staff, and so I think just trying to investigate a little on your own before you report something. A lot of times the what's happening is obvious, but a lot of times it's not. And staff trying to backstab staff is a huge issue.
Thank you. That sounds very complicated to have to navigate that.
Yeah, it was a very complicated situation.
I find myself less concerned about that. I mean, I haven't had this experience, so I maybe didn't have the caution built in, and I have less experience with vindictive calling, but it's not the mandated reporter's role to investigate whether or not the abuse is real. It's the mandated reporter's role to voice concerns and things that they're seeing that feel like a threat or danger to the person. And then it's the organizations who do the follow-ups report to investigate whether it's real or not. And although that can lead to complicators, it still becomes your role to be concerned about what you're seeing or potentially hearing from a person who's in danger over any personal investigation that you might do. I also would be cautious about not trusting a person who's reporting because their reporting is difficult to follow or seems inconsistent. Because people who are experiencing abuse or people who are experiencing danger or harm are often have difficult times reporting very clearly or directly, or may be uncomfortable with what they're saying or not have weighed it out very well. So it's very true that people can report in ways that feel hard to have really concrete opinions about, but being aware that if a person is reporting, the most likely scenario is that they need help. And if they are sharing with you that they have a concern about anything that is going on with them, it is better to intervene and have the potential to stop that concern than it is to let something go, because you're feeling that although what has been reported to you is something you should report, you don't trust the person or something like that. That is a concern to be wary of, I would think.
Thank you for that. I think it's really helpful to keep in mind. Any other thoughts on this? All right. Next question is, why is it important for mandatory reporters to provide follow-up after making a report?
I think it's important, first off, to the person that had the report made upon their behalf, so that they know that they're not alone, that someone is following up, that the person that showed concern in the first place is still showing concern, that it's not just following the rules exact and next and your number, so that it's a community of people, that you feel some support since your whole home life may be disrupted. You may have other issues going on with emotional chaos. I think it's important with the follow up to also be able to keep agencies accountable, knowing that the community is still interested and involved.
I definitely agree with that. I think that to follow up with the person just in general, because they have had this experience, but also because um, what happens very systematically. The system responds one way or another once a call has been made, and it can be really divorced from a lot of human empathy or human interaction. So to be present for that person in the way that you can, so that it's not just a thing that the system did in their life, but that people are around them and people are concerned for them.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? All right. So next I'll move to the takeaways. So, what are some of the things that you think are most important for folks watching this take away from this, and when they think about their role as mandatory reporters?
That they're important. They're very important. Being that first recognition in anybody's life, community, anybody at risk, but specifically vulnerable peoples. It's so important. And thank you for what you do. But be cautious, be aware, and do what you think is right.
Thank you, Beth.
Excuse me. I think that people avoid talking for different reasons, and people will have difficulty shaming their family or shaming their community, so there are a lot of reasons that people feel barriers. And so, like we discussed, I really want to reiterate being aware of what barriers you might feel. So if you hear something that is disconcerting, or if you hear that someone is being harmed, and your first thought is, well, I don't want to call, why is that? Is it because you're concerned for something outside of what needs to happen for that person? Or is it because you're not sure if that call should be made and you need to maybe do a little more like conversation, or like Desiree said, some follow-up in order to be comfortable, but to be prepared for the fact that you might have to make this call when it is uncomfortable, and to stay calm and to stay collected and to stay alert, to be as advised as you can about what's going to happen. But that if you are finding that you don't want to call, to really think about why, to think about what is the barrier that you are experiencing.
Thank you, Lee. Any other final thoughts on what folks should take away from this? Can read off some of the things that we talked about in our work together. I think some of the things that all of you had suggested before was to try to stay calm and collected, to think about the autonomy and maintaining control of your emotions when calls are being made against you. For instance, if you're someone who's having a report made on you. I think some of you had talked about how you might see increased vulnerabilities in communities, and we need to be supportive of the fact that people are struggling and they might be frustrated. We talked about how people might not want to see their community look bad when they're exposing abuse, and that there could be multifaceted concerns that you're not aware of from outside of the community. I think we talked about how people sometimes avoid talking out of shame, and that there's no shame in asking for help or in empowering people. And it's important to let children know that it's not their fault and that they didn't do anything wrong. And to try to help them not internalize the shame that might lead to a lifetime of self-blame or victim blaming, since that victim blaming is very rampant and it needs to be changed. And then I think it also talked about how it's important to gain an understanding and educate yourself on people's experiences, including their experiences around mandatory reporting. Those are just some of the things that we talked about in some of our meetings earlier, but any other thoughts before we move over to answering questions? All right. I think we have one question in the Q&A. This is to Beth and Lee. And again, like, you can raise your hand if you want to answer this, or keep your hand down if you don't want to answer it. Beth and Lee, how do you feel now about being reported on and removed from your home and then returned? Do you feel the outcome was positive?
No, go ahead, Beth.
So my overall outcome was positive. That initial call was not positive. The impact was very much of negative in the home, but it spurred an eventual overcoming of it. So it was like that first report that sets that pattern of behavior. I was raised in domestic violence, and so I was taken out of the home for physical abuse, and my mother accepted a lot of repeated behaviors for some time. So after some time, then the abuser was removed from the situation, and I'm so grateful, because without the CPS call, my mother would have probably still been unaware of any abuse going on, or had a hard time believing it. So I'm very, very grateful, though it was a lot of struggle at the time.
Thank you so much.
I echo that completely. I don't necessarily think that the interventions that the state brought had a direct impact on what was going on in my family, but the intervention definitely did. And my situation did change. My family had to do a bunch of work in order to to recongeal as a family, and we did do that work as a unit. So although the state didn't necessarily provide us with tools, the state of the system didn't necessarily provide us with the tools that we needed to do that work, that intervention changed things in my family significantly enough. There were massive negative consequences to my family. It had a long-term impact, and it didn't in every way benefit me. I did end up experiencing difficulty from having been someone who reported in my family, but the change in the way there was like an overall approach also helped me and my family navigate that. So I wouldn't change the fact that I had that experience. But if you ask me if the state came in and made my family better, the answer is certainly not.
Thank you. It sounds like it's a complicated issue for sure.
Mhm.
Morgan,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go. I'm having really bad leg spasms in my legs.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, of course. Take care of yourself. Thank you for being with us, Desiree.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Of course. Yeah. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Desiree.
Hi.
Bye. Have a good night.
You too.
I don't know how to turn this off.
All right. Um, do we have any other questions for the panelists? I'm not seeing anything else, but let's see.
So Morgan and Anna, we had several conversations leading up to this, and you guys participated in that. Were there things that you guys heard in the conversation that you were hoping that would be reflected in this conversation?
Let's see. I think at one point, I think one of you had talked about like the importance of like being aware of like what like neurodivergent children might be like when you're making a report, and just like being sensitive to how that might show up.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Like, as Desiree was saying, with talking about how people would present when discussing. I'm neurodivergent, and I've got a long list of diagnoses, and when I first started to discuss anything with anybody about my situation at home, I would probe people. I would give one small detail and see how that landed. And it probably appeared very strange to a neurotypical person, but that's how I would start to feel safe about communication. So I had a lot of communication issues, and at some points I didn't speak at all about it. And so, but it would show up in my behavior and interaction with others as a school child playing. So I think that it that's it.
Thank you. Yeah. I also want to kind of put out, if it's easier to just like write in the chat when you like respond to like a question or something, like I can just read stuff off of the chat if that's easier, if you just want to like send me like a message. Um, so yeah,
I think, yeah. And to second that, I think hopefully you'll have multiple interactions with a person before they bring something to you. So you'll have an understanding of what it's like to talk to that person, or what communication can be like. But to be really alert that people who are, excuse me, more vulnerable are going to have different communication styles that may be related on their vulnerability, or may be related on them as a person, or may be related on diagnoses that they cover or have. But to be as open as you can to hearing what the person is trying to communicate to you, and less concerned about trying to make them like explain something clearly, and more concerned about trying to make the space for them to tell you what it is that they're trying to say. And whatever your words or processes that they use to do that, to be prepared for the fact that things might come at you in ways that aren't straightforward. It's very, very unlikely that you're going to have a child come up to you and say, this is happening to me in the home and I want you to do something about it. That is not very likely the conversation you're going to have. What is going to happen is you're going to be having a conversation, and someone's going to be sharing things of whatever level of vulnerability in their language that they use, and something additional and disconcerting is going to be bundled in that information. And so you want to be prepared to be alert for what those things might be, but then also to follow up on that and give space for the person to be able to communicate what it is that they wanted to say to you. You may feel like, oh my goodness, I just heard a child say that somebody's hitting them. I need to drill into that. But before you maybe do that work, think about how you want to go about that, and then give the child space to talk about what is coming to mind for them, or something like that. Apply that kind of flexible knowledge to other populations, but make sure that the person that you're speaking with is using their words to describe their feelings.
Thank you, Lee. And I think this is reminding me of a conversation that we had where as a disabled person, I experienced things as a young person that probably should have been reported, but were not. I think I mentioned to you both how, like, when I had described what I was experiencing to, I think it would have been like the school psychologist, she told me that I should tell her if I ever was bruised, but didn't ask if I was already experiencing bruising. And I remember as a young autistic child being very confused by the way that she phrased this. And so I think our conversations here is kind of reminding me of that, and just reminding me of like why it's really important to be kind of intentional in how you kind of phrase things, because that might like be very confusing to a young child. And I think, yeah, and Lima, what you were saying also is that like someone's probably not going to say like, I'm experiencing these things and please do something about it, because to them, this might just be their normal. They might not have like a sense of like that this is necessarily wrong if this is what they live with all the time. So. All right, let me see if I have any other notes that we had talked about.
There's another question in the Q&A.
Oh, we have another question. All right. This is from Eli Cox. So I'll read this off. So for Beth and Lee, thank you for all you have shared. Optional question, of course. Thinking back to when you were younger, were there any actions or words of affirmations from caring adults that have stuck with you through your life? And if not, what would you have wanted other adults in your life to have said or done to show you they were present and cared?
I am older. I am so I don't know how much times have changed. I know there's a bunch of talk about times have changed, but definitely my experience of being a child was that when I would talk about things that were concerning or upsetting to me, there was a lot of work in the adult world around me to dissuade that, to say, to normalize the experiences, or to dismiss my feelings of being upset or concerned, and to sort of make me feel like I was griping but not experiencing anything worth griping, some version of that. And nobody said anything specific or did anything specific, but what I definitely carry with me forward were the people who heard me and trusted that I understood my own feelings, that it wasn't their role to make me feel like being upset or being concerned was wrong, and that I needed to somehow have those feelings brushed aside. It was definitely being heard and respected that had the largest impact on my ability to feel centered in myself, and for my ability to grasp what I was dealing with. For me, the worst experiences I had as far as negatively impacting my personal healing were people stopping me from feeling like I was entitled to heal from something. And so I cannot caution people enough to be concerned about silencing or shutting things down that are uncomfortable or that you feel are normalized, if the person who is sharing it with you is feeling that there's something disconcerting for them, why is that? And even if it doesn't translate to something that you feel like you need to call about, even if you're just listening to a person talk about what their experiences are, to give them space that they have an understanding of what their internal dialogue is, and not to try and tell them they're wrong for their thoughts or that they should be thinking differently.
Thank you so much, Lee.
I had a similar kind of experience of feelings being brushed off because others were uncomfortable with them. But there were no affirmations, there was no supportiveness. But I do have a distinct memory of victim blaming of, oh, you're back home, so it's not so bad. And that has stuck with me for a very long time of, oh, it was unfounded the first time, but the next several times, it took to the very end to be founded. So I had a lot of victim shaming and blaming. I really encourage, though, to just be kind. It doesn't necessarily have to be words of affirmation, but just kindness, that you're aware of the situation and you know that the child is going through a lot, and just say, hey, I'm thinking of you. Anything kind goes a very long way. For when I was going through that, I didn't experience kindness like that from family members.
It's really sorry to hear that, Beth. That makes sense that would be very impactful. All right. Do we have any other questions from the audience members? Any other thoughts from our panelists, Beth and Lee? Anything else that we haven't talked about that you feel like we should cover in our last minutes together?
I do want to add that CPS is not a perfect system. It will not always go to expectations, as nothing really does, but it is a foothold in the door for vulnerable children, people at risk, to be able to get to some sort of safety, or at least know that what they're going through is not normal, that it is not, that it can be, that it's wrong, and that they can seek better for themselves.
Definitely, that seems important to know that you can try to have better.
Yeah, I want to echo that, and I also want to put it out there that this is good work that we do in the community, and this is a good place to be. It feels it can feel like a big task, and it can feel really frustrating or disconcerting, but that being able to be there to help somebody who needs the help is really a precious thing to be able to do in someone else's life.
Well, I don't think we have any other questions. Suppose we can wrap up early if we don't have any other questions or thoughts. We'll wait just a bit longer to see if there's any other questions from the audience members before we do that. But well, thank you for being with us. I hope that you have enjoyed our 3-part webinar series on mandatory reporting. Please take the survey if you have not. See, I can drop that in the chat. I'm not sure. Let's see.
Morgan. It's in the chat.
Okay. Oh, thank you. You just did it. All right. Thank you, Rihanna. So yes, please feel free to take our survey and let us know your thoughts, any other topics that you'd like to hear from us. And please feel free to reach out to Rihanna or I think I can put our my email in the chat. If you have any questions for us, or if you need to reach out to us for anything about this webinar series, or if you have ideas for other, oh, I think we have another topic. Oh, we just have, I just want to say thank you to the panelists for sharing their stories and their experiences. This was very helpful. Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.